Babylon's Banksters, China's Money. Babylon's Banksters, China's Money. You're listening to UniquilibriuM, presented by Hakeem Alibokus Alexander on Spreaker, Social Podcasting, and Wisdom, Social Audio Inc. Presented for World Reading Club in association with ExercisingYourMind.com and UniquilibriuM. This edition's reading focus comes to us from Babylon's Banksters, The Alchemy of Deep Physics, High Finance, and Ancient Religions. It was published in 2010 by Joseph P. Farrell through Adventures Unlimited Press. I'm continuing from yesterday's reading, all from the first section of the book. I'm up to part 3 here of chapter 1, I think it is. And it's called China's Money. So leading up to that, I will read the tail end of where I left off yesterday and continue. Babylon's Banksters. So in this respect, it is important to observe the pattern that the Li clan typifies. 1. The clan is ancient, with strong ties going back millennia, both to government and finance. 2. The clan is moreover connected with a secret society, whose activities in turn are connected with A. Occult religious activity, B. Criminal business, organization, and activity, and C. Assassinations, blackmail, and infiltration of government and finance. 3. The clan is clearly connected to a mathematical model of economic and credit activity, implying a hidden interest in developing such formally explicit models. And finally, 4. That model is the culprit responsible for the current economic meltdown, which has affected primarily the institutions of the Anglo-American financial elite. As will be seen, such activities and patterns or relationships are not unique to the present or previous century. They are, in fact, as the Li clan itself evidences, millennia old and firmly rooted within the history of human civilizations and their banking class. However, the consistency of this behavior and this constellation of relationships is rooted in something more, and certainly nothing less than human nature, or greed, or even the predictable actions of a particular socio-economic class. That something else lies in a little-noticed connection between physics and finance that is as old as man's fascination with the stars, and with what good or ill fortunes they might portend. And that is also to say that there has been, since ancient times, a profound connection between physics and economics, and a struggle between those who view both as closed systems and those who view both as open systems. We shall call those who adhere to the closed system of physics and finance by the term banksters, to indicate the chimerical and criminal hybrids of gangster and bankster, or gangster and banker. So we shall call those who adhere to the closed system of physics and finance by the term banksters, to indicate the chimerical and criminal hybrids of gangster and banker. These people are indeed driven by an almost boundless lust for power, by a criminal greed and wanton disregard of the humanity they wish to enslave. But they are also driven by a knowledge of certain hidden things, among them the profound relationship between physics and finance. 3. China's money. There is a little-known aspect to China's booming economy that Western financiers, economists, and media mandarins are loath to discuss, and that is that China's money is created by China and not borrowed from private bankers. In effect, this means China's money is debt-free. In short, Communist China has followed the precedent established by the American Federal Constitution, where the money creating and issuing power lies with the Congress, that is, with the state. As Ellen Hodgson Brown observed in her magisterial book on the whole problem of central and private banking monopolies on money issuance, called Web of Debt, the key difference in China's system and that prevailing in most other nations is its banking system. China has a government-issued currency and a system of national banks that are actually owned by the nation. According to Wikipedia, the People's Bank of China is unusual in acting as a national bank, focusing on the country, not on the currency. The notion of national banking, as opposed to private central banking, goes back to Lincoln, Carey, and the American nationalists. Henry C.K. Leo distinguishes the two systems like this. A national bank serves the interests of the nation and its people. A central bank serves the interests of private international finance. Even though China's currency, the yuan, is pegged to the dollar in terms of its exchange rate value, China's banking system is testament to the fact that its government has seen what American politicians and a great deal of its people formally understood, namely that when a private bank creates money, it only creates the principal, not the interest. When a state, on the other hand, creates money, it has the ability to expand the money supply according to the credit needs of the nation. In short, when a nation's money represents a principle on which interest is owed, someone always comes out the loser, since there is never enough money in circulation to repay the debt interest, and thus a national debt can never be repaid. It can only grow. Contrariwise, when a nation's money represents a receipt for goods and services rendered and is issued interest-free by the state itself, that state can experience almost total employment, and there is no built-in principle of debt and scarcity. It is these two systems, where money is created by a private monopoly in limited supply, which, pausing here for a moment, I must point out that's how we operate in the United States with the Federal Reserve, right? So it is these two systems, one where money is created by a private monopoly in limited supply, which represents an interest-bearing debt note, or where money is created by the state, which they do in China, as a receipt for goods and service and is debt-free, that there are two systems which have contended against each other throughout history. In the former system, the system of money in circulation is closed. That's the Fed, the Federal Reserve System. It's closed. And there is never as much money in circulation as there is debt. And hence, scarcity becomes the order of the day. That's the Bankster way. That chimerization and hybridization of gangster and bankster, a closed system. And there is never as much money in circulation as there is debt. And hence, scarcity becomes the order of the day, as limited supplies of money compete for limited goods, resources, and energy. In the latter system, The system of money is open and can expand as the economy, whose goods and services it represents as receipts, expands with it. In terms of the analogy to physics, the former system, the Federal Reserve System that we use in the United States, can never function at over-unity, whereas in the latter system, it must function as such. Just a note here, I must pause because of the fact that there have been people who are pushing back against the fact that I have stated over and over again that I find it impossible for me to conceive of and experience the universe that we live in as a closed, finite system exclusively. I understand that the universe as we know it, and even the planet Earth, is a closed, finite system, but that our existence in general is an open, infinite, or eternal system. And people argue against that when I will state again that if you have that view, that limited view of a closed system, that's what it is. It's simply a limited view. Because people who mostly believe that, at least everyone I've encountered so far, holds only that view, and do not also hold the view that I also have, in addition to understanding that one, of an open system of over-unity and an eternal system, one that always has been, always will be. For example, it has been, it is, and it always will be. Whereas if you, when I believe in an eternal system does not exclude closed systems. There are closed systems within an eternal system. How does that not make sense? How do you only exclusively focus on the limited and not let your mind expand to something that's infinite? In fact, a number itself is infinite. You can always add one to any number, no matter how large it is. There's no biggest number. So, this is what we have, a competition of two systems. The Banksters system is one of a closed system, and a system that functions otherwise. Well, I don't know what we'd call that yet. Maybe a free market. Continuing. C. Nazi Germany. Physics and finance fully rationalized. This relationship between finance and physics was, in modern times, first clearly perceived by that nation which not only established state-created debt-free money, but which also sponsored a variety of secret research projects into free energy physics and technologies, Nazi Germany. When World War I ended and the Allies imposed war reparations on defeated Germany, the total reparations to be paid exceeded the value of all the property in Germany by 3 times. I just had a revelation just now by reading this. That line, because of all the research that I've been doing, I came to a realization of something that I cannot even say. It's very bad. I have to tell somebody, though. It's not something I can hold in. When World War I ended, continuing, when World War I ended and the Allies imposed war reparations on defeated Germany, the total reparations to be paid exceeded the value of all the property in Germany by 3 times. Anyone who has studied the history knows the story. Germany hyperinflated its currency, paying off the Allies with increasingly worthless Reichsmarks and destroying Germany's economy in the process. But it is to be noted, these Reichsmarks were still the issuances of a privately controlled bank, and thus Germany's debt situation only compounded dramatically. Hitler's Reichsbank president, Dr. Hjalmar Horace Greeley Schacht, let the big secret out in his 1967 book, The Magic of Money. The mark's dramatic devaluation began soon after the Reichsbank was privatized or delivered to private investors. What drove the wartime inflation into hyperinflation, said Schacht, was speculation by foreign investors who would sell the mark short, betting on its decreasing value. Speculation in the German mark was made possible because the Reichsbank Speculation in the German mark was made possible because the Reichsbank made massive amounts of currency available for borrowing, marks that were created on demand and lent at a profitable interest to the bank. When the Reichsbank could not keep up with the voracious demand for marks, other private investment banks were allowed to create them out of nothing and lend them at interest as well. Thus, the German government was not responsible for the post-war hyperinflation. It was Germany's privately owned central bank and its monopoly on the country's money creation, money created as a circulating note of debt. That created the problem. Germany's economy was crashed and devastated by the bankers until Hitler. While most people are aware that various private financial powers in the West were instrumental in placing Hitler and the National Socialist Party into power in Germany, what most do not realize is how quickly Hitler turned on his backers and refused to play ball by the same old Rockefeller-Rothschild rules. Autocratic authority did give Adolf Hitler something the American greenbackers could only dream about: total control of the economy. He was able to test their theories, and he proved that they worked. Like for Lincoln, Hitler's choices were to either submit to total debt slavery or create his own fiat money, and like Lincoln, he chose the fiat solution. He implemented a plan of public works along the lines proposed by Jacob Coxey and the Greenbackers in the 1890s. Projects earmarked for funding included flood control, repair of public buildings and private residences, and construction of new buildings, roads, bridges, canals, and port facilities. The projected cost of the various programs was fixed at 1 billion units of the national currency. 1 billion non-inflationary bills of exchange called labor treasury certificates were then issued against this cost. Millions of people were put to work on these projects, and the workers were paid with the treasury certificates. The workers then spent the certificates on goods and services, creating more jobs for more people. The certificates were also referred to as MEFO or MIFO bills, or sometimes as Feder money. They avoided the need to borrow from international lenders or to pay off international debt. The result of these Nazi machinations against the international money power was predictable. Foreign credit was refused, and hence Germany faced an almost complete inability to conduct foreign trade and commerce. But again, the Nazi regime did an end run around the banksters, restoring foreign trade by cutting out the banking middlemen and resorting to a system of barter with other nations. And where did Hitler get these radical financial ideas? When he first attended a meeting of the early National Socialist Party, he learned the views of a German economist named Gottfried Feder. On the basis of Feder's ideas was that the state should create and control its money supply through a nationalized central bank rather than have it created by privately owned banks, to whom interest would have to be paid. From this view derived the conclusion that finance had enslaved the population by usurping the nation's control of money. Feder and other German theory. I don't think I have to point out the name Feder is like federal, like Federal Reserve Bank, even though they practice the opposite thing. Feder was talking about taking things away from a private-owned bank, whereas the Federal Reserve is a privately owned bank. I just like to keep track of interesting things like that. It may have nothing to do with each other, but then again, it might have everything to do. Continuing, Feder and other German theorists had, for their part, based their theories on a study of the American Constitution. Okay, I have to stop here again. Once again, the book Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, which I've been reading here also as part of the Wealth Attraction Research Studies, which this here about Babylon's Banksters is it's an accessory to that. It's a deeper accessory for the people who are interested in metaphysics, paranormal, supernatural, alchemy, and things like that. And but what I've seen by studying and reading Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations from 1776, and from looking at other books since 1997, including Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, The Cash Flow Quadrant by Robert Kiyosaki, Fake by Robert Kiyosaki, Fake Money, Fake Teachers, Fake Assets, how lies are keeping the poor and middle class poorer, Robert Kiyosaki's The Capitalist Manifesto, as well as his Why the Rich Get Richer, so on and so forth. Also the Little Book of Economics and How Money Works, and on and on and on it can go, is that all of this stuff that I'm looking at and reading and sharing right now in Babylon's Banksters, and as well as the book that I just picked up today, which is called Hidden Finance, Rogue Networks and Secret Sorcery, The Fascist International 9/11 and Penetrated Operations, also by Joseph P. Farrell. It's all interconnected. It's one big story that I'm seeing. And the interesting thing is that most people aren't reading all of these different books or looking at these different sources. So people who are reading Joseph P. Farrell are not reading Robert Kiyosaki. They're not reading Adam Smith. They're not reading Marx and Engels' Communist Manifesto either as well. They're not reading the Little Book of Economics and the How Money Works. Not all of those together, as well as Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion and books on engineering. It's just, I know it's difficult and it takes a lot of time, which is why I had to free myself from working for anybody else so that I could have the time to continue to do all this research all day long and all these readings and things like that, because it's a luxury, quite frankly. But I've been doing this all my life, and I wouldn't be able to do it if I was constantly working for somebody else and not operating as I have been. And it's really hard, but the things that come to light from doing this, from practicing and behaving like this are, well, they're extremely enlightening and fascinating and sometimes shocking, disheartening, but nevertheless fascinating. But let me digress no longer and continue. So Feder and other German theorists had for their part based their theories on a study of the American Constitution, and more importantly, that President Abraham Lincoln had financed a northern effort in the American Civil War by creating debt-free greenbacks, bypassing New York banks and interest debt completely. But Nazi Germany did something else, something quite significant, realizing that Germany was at the mercy of the very banksters that controlled the world's oil supplies and hence the energy needed to maintain Germany's national sovereignty. The Third Reich established entire departments of the SS called the Forschung, Entwicklung, and Patente, and the SS Entwicklungsstelle 4, or Research, Development, and Patents, and SS Development Area 4, respectively. The top secret mission brief of these departments were to scour and pull patents having national security implications and to investigate and develop the technologies of free energy, i.e. the technologies that would allow Germany to engineer the physical medium and its energy directly and to tap into it for its energy needs and as a weapon. Add to this the fact that within the intellectual cauldron that was the SS, ideas from advanced, though little-known physics conceptions circulated and percolated along with the idea that there was a physics hidden in ancient tomes and epics, and one now obtains a very revealing set of relationships. 1. A nation that has restored its sovereign right to issue its own debt-free currency, breaking from the orbit of the international money power. 2. A nation that has also clearly seen that in order to break completely from the dominance of that power, it must have access to a completely different source of energy that is nearly inexhaustible and not monopolized by that private money power. 3. Thus, that nation must seek to develop and control the technologies of the manipulation of that energy for itself. And finally, 4. That nation has perceived an ancient link or connection between the physics it seeks to develop and the financial policy it seeks to develop. One may discern from this list quite obviously that Nazi Germany was not only able to achieve nearly full employment mere years after the regime took power, but that it was very deliberately gearing up for an inevitable war. But this list discloses a possible hidden reason for those war preparations beyond those of the Nazi lust of living space and world conquest. Germany's decision to issue state-created money would mean that the international financiers would be unable to exercise control through the international gold standard, and this may have led to controlling Germany through warfare instead. This hidden reason for the war, that the Allies essentially acted as agents for the international money power against a great power that had essentially severed all connections to it, may also provide a similar rationalization for the Allied demands for German unconditional surrender, essentially ensuring that the war would continue until Germany was basically destroyed and physically occupied. The relationship between banking and the quest to acquire or suppress exotic physics technology may be glimpsed by yet another detour, this time to a persistent struggle. D. Energy and money creating autarky. Energy and money creating autarky. If one takes these two very disparate instances as a clue, and especially that of Nazi Germany, then this suggests that there has been a persistent struggle throughout history between those who wish to democratize the production of energy based on alternative energy technologies and who similarly wish to restore the state its money creating power and wrest it from private hands, and those who wish to monopolize that hidden technology in physics, and similarly to hold a private monopoly over the money creation of various states. Once again, if one takes these two very disparate instances as a clue, and especially that of Nazi Germany, then this suggests that there has been a persistent struggle throughout history between those who wish to democratize the production of energy based on alternative energy technologies and who similarly wish to restore to the state its money-creating power and wrest it from private hands, and those who wish to monopolize that hidden technology and physics and similarly to hold a private monopoly over the money creation of various states. Consider what these very unique and different examples disclose. 1. In the case of communist China, we have an instance of modern and technologically sophisticated world power issuing state-created debt-free money, a fact that has led to its economic boom and its independence from the international money power. You know, I've got to take a pause again to back up here. One, I have to grab a notebook that's in my bag, but to also note that, of course, as we know, in 3 days, the BRICS conference is happening with Brazil, Russia, India, Japan, China, South Africa, and various other countries, which are talking about, and some people speculate, including Robert Kiyosaki, that they're wanting to propose a new currency that's not based on and founded on the American dollar, and to have an independent currency off of that, as well as the fact that, got my notebook, as well as that we have had all of these connections to the crash, but let me, all right, got the book. I'm going to write these things as I go on now, so I shouldn't be distracted from this. All right, good. So again, consider what these very unique and different examples disclose. 1, in the case of communist China, we have an instance of a modern and technologically sophisticated world power issuing state-created debt-free money, a fact that has led to its economic boom and its independence from the international money power. 2, in the case of Nazi Germany, we have not only a nation that saw the advantage of such state-issued debt-free currency, but also of a state that clearly saw the connection between that sovereign money power and the analogous physics of receiving its energy directly from the physical medium, an energy source not based on non-renewable energy resources. Furthermore, it is clearly implied by the Nazi SS interest in ancient and esoteric texts that there may be an ancient connection between this type of finance and this type of physics. The other side note here is to recognize that we have a lot of things disclosed, if you will, in what people consider to be science fiction. This same idea about the Nazi SS is played out in Captain America and the Marvel Cinematic Universe in general. Bear with me, for example. I know it might sound crazy, of course, but listen. In the first Captain America, what were the Germans doing, especially in the rogue Nazi science division known as Hydra? They were looking for, with the head of the Red Skull, right, looking for the Tesseract, which they found hidden in this guy's like little hideout in a wall. Well, actually, it was in some kind of sarcophagus in the middle of the place. The decoy was hidden in the wall, but this is an illusion pointing to what Germany was really doing, right? Looking for all this esoteric, actual renewable free energy systems, right? Which in the movie, it was played out as being the Tesseract with one of the Infinity Stones in it, the Space Stone. If you look at Hellboy, what was the premise of that movie? How did Hellboy come about? Well, once again, the Nazi science division, you could call it Hydra, right? The SS was looking for exotic and metaphysical and different occult technologies that they thought would be hidden inside ancient text. And what did they do? Opened a portal and brought Hellboy out of it, and he became kind of like a superhero. So then you also have it even more clearly revealed to us about exactly how deep this goes. When you even have Captain America 2 talking about Project Paperclip, bringing the Nazis over, and that was Hydra, and how they infiltrated the World Security Council and the entire American government, and Hydra was all deep inside and within it. Just like in reality today, where you have many Nazis that have fled down to Argentina. Many of them have come over and were the founders of NASA through Project Paperclip, including Werner von Braun and several others. You also have the interesting implications of what it means that the largest country in South America has the largest Japanese population outside of Japan, who are the allies of Germany, so on and so forth. There are lots of interesting and varied connections. But let's continue here with Babylon's Banksters. As will be seen, the struggle between these two camps has erupted throughout history in violence, as the latter group that advocates open systems seeks to overturn the dominant order of the money changers, the banksters, based on closed systems, or conversely, as the banksters seek to extend their power via closed systems of physics and economics must respond to the inevitable threat posed by civilizations or countries adopting the open ones. Most recently, that struggle erupted in the enormous conflict we call World War II, as Nazi Germany, for whatever its genocidal and murderous crimes against humanity, at least perceived part of the struggle correctly. It was a war to free Germany from a heinous international money power, misrepresented, of course, in Nazi ideology by the Jews, based in Great Britain and the British Empire and in the United States of America. Thus, Nazi Germany's pursuit of free energy and energy independence, or autarky, as well as her pursuit of a radical alternative hyper-dimensional physics, was part of that struggle. By the same token, not for nothing did Nazi Germany essentially restore the idea of public, debt-free, state-created money and credit, while simultaneously pursuing these super-secret advanced physics projects. The two were conceptually united, and as we shall also discover within these pages, had been so for a long time. The Nazis were simply the ones who, in modern times, first drew the connection between physics and finance and determined to do something about it. As far as Nazi Germany was concerned, then, there was a grisly and gruesome logic to the Holocaust, for having identified world Jewry as the center of this international money power, the use of enslaved Jews in the concentration camps to create this new physics and its associated technologies, and a new economy on which they hoped eventually to place the Reich, was in their warped view a kind of justice meted out to those who had so ravaged and pillaged Germany in the wake of the Versailles Treaty and the Dawes and Young plans. There was, of course, a half-truth to this, for there was indeed a prominent element of Jewish, or rather Zionist, influence in such financial circles. One need only recall the names of Rothschild, Warburg, Schiff, and so on in this regard. But there all truth stops and the lies begin, for there was also a prominent element of Protestant money groups involved as well. Thus, for consistency's sake, the Nazis should equally have been concerned with the Protestant aristocracy of England, America, Canada, and even their own country as well. World War II ended, of course, with the defeat of Nazi Germany, but not necessarily with the defeat of Nazism and its goals in alternative physics and finance. However, as we shall see, the post-war period began with an unusual event, an event I believe many have profoundly misinterpreted. Rather than seeing that a kind of detente or modus vivendi was struck between elements of what I call the Nazi International on the one hand and the globalist Anglo-American corporate and banking elite on the other, most prefer to view certain events as testament to the fact that one more or less coherent and monolithic international conspiracy of money exists, and that it is entering the endgame phase of its goal of total world domination. Endgame, as you recall, is also the name of the final Avengers movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe with, of course, when Thanos got in possession of all 6 of the Infinity Stones, he snapped his fingers and wiped out half of all existing living things. Because of resources, remember? So if you look at it, Thanos was actually of the closed system view, because he viewed all the resources in the universe as finite. So that's a closed system, Federal Reserve Bank, privately owned bank, international bankers view, right, where he perceived it as limited, not enough to go around, right? So Thanos was actually this, not only he was one of these, the part of the Protestant aristocracy of England, America, Canada, and even the people in Germany as well, who are the Protestants, with the big money banking of the private bankers who believe in a closed system. Because only in a closed system can you cause people to feel scarcity and therefore control, with having more debt in circulation than there is money to go around, which means less jobs, less affluency, less of everything for everyone. But let's continue here. Okay. On the one hand, in the globalist Anglo-American corporate banking elite, other most prefer to view certain events as a testament to the fact that one more or less coherent and monolithic international conspiracy of money exists, and that it is entering the end game phase of its goal of total world domination. The closer to that goal that this group actually approaches, the more sharp and acute will factional infighting within it become, particularly as such banksters are enthralled to the closed system paradigm of physics and finance. In short, that post-war detente is showing distinctive signs of breaking it down, as each faction maneuvers to emerge as the dominant faction when the eventual goal is reached. For that globalist elite, this problem is further compounded by the emergence of the economic powers of Eurasia, Russia, China, and Japan, who are also showing increasing signs of reluctance to play by the tired old rules of the Anglo-American Empire. witness once again Dr. Lee's mysterious disappearance from the West and reemergence as a risk manager for a prominent corporation in communist China. However, oh, by the way, once again, remember in 3 days from today, the BRICS conference is happening in which Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are meeting the 22nd of August, 2023, to take a stab at establishing a new monetary system, a new currency that is not based on the American dollar. Some claim it may be based on gold. This may be faulty, but that's happening in 3 days. However, between those periods when this conflict of worldviews of physics and finance breaks out into open violence and warfare, the struggle is more covert and hidden, as suggested again by the David Lee episode. In the case of such covert warfare, the various factions of international banksters resort to every occulted means at their disposal to suppress open development of alternative physics, and therefore of the alternative economies and financial institutions such physics would inevitably usher in, while they seek to maintain the status quo and become the dominant faction within it. The methods, chiefly, are threefold. They must first suppress technologies that testify to the existence of another physics than the public consumption physics they have so carefully inculcated for the masses and promoted in academies and textbooks. Another segue to that, if you want to understand some of the alternative physics, you can look at Dark Mission, Richard C. Hoagland, also Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion by Paul A. LaViolette, based on the work of T. Townsend Brown, the real Tesla, Nikola Tesla, and others. Continuing, the methods are chiefly threefold. They must first suppress technologies that testify to the existence of another physics than the public consumption physics they have so carefully inculcated for the masses and promoted in academies and textbooks. Secondly, they must suppress the alternative physics itself, for in some respects it is the real source of their power, as we shall also eventually see. Thirdly, and finally, they must obfuscate the profound, deep, and ancient connections between this alternative physics and alternative institutions of finance and economy. To sum it up, they must seek to suppress its open development while simultaneously pursue its covert development so that they can, in turn, monopolize it and further consolidate power into their own hands. By the same token, this means that any given faction within what is called the New World Order must likewise inhibit or arrest the development of such alternative theories and technologies by rival factions, or alternatively develop superior versions of it or defenses against it themselves. Conversely, those groups or individuals advocating open systems of physics and economics not only must run the gauntlet of all who oppose them, but develop their theories and technologies and bring them to as wide a public as quickly as possible. In short, the good guys, quote unquote, seek to democratize the whole science. Consequently, we are conspicuously in the presence of a very complex dynamic, one stretching from the individual person to whole civilizations and all the institutions thereof, and one moreover crossing several disciplines, physics, Consequently, we are conspicuously in the presence of a very complex dynamic, one stretching from the individual person to whole civilizations and all the institutions thereof, and one moreover crossing several disciplines, physics, economics, and finance, theology, history, and running like a gold and crimson thread through the millennia of human history. We must consider salient modern events where this struggle has openly erupted and compare them to ancient manifestations of a similar nature. We must ponder the presence within ancient megaliths and temples of a profound astronomical and astrological science, their physics implications, and ponder further why so many of these ancient sites are also associated with the presence of money changers, of banksters. We must similarly ponder again what all this might mean for the occurrence of an ancient and interplanetary war within our own celestial neighborhood. Yet again, we must consider what all this has to do with the stubborn persistence of alchemy from ancient to modern times, and what it may have to do with the consistent royal and imperial patronage of it throughout the Middle Ages and early Renaissance. We must look for the clues of deliberate suppression of this physics and its implied economics throughout the ages, and especially in our own. And finally, we shall have reason to consider why bloodlines seem to be such an important part of the story for those bankster and royal elites. Given all these complex dynamics and disparate facts, I was confronted with something of a problem in writing this book. Normally, I aim for a relatively high degree of completeness, or at least thoroughness, when writing a book, but I quickly discovered that if I were to explore every facet of this complex dynamic with anything approaching thoroughness, I would not be writing a mere book, but several books, with each aspect of the problem requiring volumes of its own. Let me pause there for a second and say that he did, and he has been doing just that, by the way. As testament to that is the fact that I just got in my hands one that was published in 2016. He also has another one coming up this year. So when I've come to Barnes & Nobles and I've asked them for a copy to see if they could order from me the book I'm currently reading, which is Babylon's Banksters, The Alchemy of Deep Physics, High Finance, and Ancient Religions, they say it's no longer in print, it's nowhere in their warehouses or anything like that, but they've all mentioned to me that he has another book coming out this year in September, so that's next month. But I also found Hidden Finance, Rogue Networks, and Secret Sorcery, which is the other book I actually read on call-in earlier. I read the entire introduction, which is very long and very good. And so anyway, just a note that he's doing just that, which is when he said, if I were to explore every facet of this complex dynamic with anything approaching thoroughness, I would not be writing a mere book, but several books, with each aspect of the problem requiring volumes of its own. For example, the involvement of major corporations in suppression of inventions and technologies implying a new physics and new energy source is a story that would and could consume volumes, as there is no shortage of such stories on the internet and books about the subject. Similarly, the machinations of the international banksters has provided a rich field for research and speculation and spawned literally hundreds of books on the subjects, both by those sanctioned insiders and those examining the subject from without. When one adds economics and physics and systems of money creation to this picture, the bibliography of such a work itself would end up being a whole book. Think about what he just said. The bibliography itself of such a work would end up being a whole book. He's basically saying just the references, just listing the references would be a whole book itself. So clearly, some other approach was needed. What I have attempted to do, therefore, is outline a case and my interpretation of the evidence, backing it up with examples. This book is thus deliberately intended to be read not only in conjunction with my own previous books on alternative science and history, as yet another chapter in a very big story, but also in tandem with the overall output of other researchers into the field. Thus, it simply assumes the existence of that research and the reader's broad familiarity with it. Holy crasaboli. I just said that the fact that I've been reading all these other books like Wealth of Nations, the Little Book of Economics, How Money Works, the Capitalist Manifesto, the Communist Manifesto, all of the other books is exactly how I've been seeing all these interconnected webs of these things. He said this book is thus deliberately intended to be read not only in conjunction with my own previous books on alternative science and history, as yet another chapter in a very big story, but also in tandem with the overall output of other researchers into the field. Just like I've been reading, Tax-Free Wealth, for example, by one of Robert Kiyosaki's so-called Rich Dad advisors. And the one thing that I keep repeating, that 99.5% of the tax code in the United States is written to legally avoid paying taxes, and so on and so forth. Who do you think that's written for, right? For the people who are imposing a closed system upon us to operate in an open system. When you have an open system like that, that's how you're able to not pay taxes legally, because that's the essence of nature itself, is open system and infinite, eternal, not a closed, finite system like the earth itself. But the earth itself exists in an infinite, eternal system, and therefore infinite and eternal energies exist. But let me not digress again and go off on my own tangent here too much. I'll do it every once in a while. So continuing, but let there be no mistake. This is not an easy, light-hearted book simply because it is not a complete or thorough one. The number and types of details, conceptions, and disciplines to be examined are considerable, and their interrelationships are even more so. With that said, the reader is cautioned about two things. First, in order to survey these connections and their implications, much of this book is introduction. Only at the very end and in the final chapter will it be possible to tie all the threads together and draw their implications. Thus, patience is required as the data is laid out and connections are drawn. Secondly, what is presented here is likewise a speculative though nevertheless argued case. Were each and every point to be documented at length, as already mentioned, each would require a tome in its own right. This is a survey, not an encyclopedia, a study, not a painting, an essay, not a mathematical or historical proof. Nonetheless, I hope that by consulting certain sources, mentioning certain topics, construing the interrelationships, and drawing the conclusions and implications in the manner that I have, that I will point the reader in the direction to examine these questions more fully on his own. For the problem is not in the dearth of information, interpretations, and implications, but in their surfeit. The interpretation proffered here is consequently not the only possible one. I maintain only that, of all the possible interpretations of this vast complex of information, alchemy, astrology, astronomy, torsion, Egypt, Babylon, Nazis, finance, geometries, earth grids, and scalar physics, ancient texts and tomes, and modern mathematical gurus speaking the arcane language of statistical economics and topological lore, that this interpretation is at least a plausible one. All that being said, if along the way I have in some small measure contributed to the demise of these goofy, insane, and ruthless banksters and their murderously utopian and loony New World Order schemes, then so much the better, for one thing, I hope, is now evident. If in the private creation of money as an interest-bearing debt note, the only principal and not the interest is created by those banks and circulated as money, then it inevitably follows that, under such a system, debt can only grow and never be repaid. With that fact, the influence and control of that private class of banksters over the policies of state can only grow, and to the increasing detriment of that nation's people and its public good. As such, any discussion of financial policy by any politician of any political party affiliation in any nation that does not begin with a call to restore the power of money creation and issuance to the government in such a capacity that it is made to serve the public good and not the private rapacity of a bankster class is merely deception, and deception for a very simple reason. The big secret of money is not only that it must represent something, but rather that it must represent someone. As such, there are really only two basic models of money known to history. The first model, where money represents a debt interest-bearing note, the something created by a private monopoly, the someone for its own class interest and profit, and the second model, where money represents a receipt for goods and services, the something produced by a state's people, the someone, who through the agency of their state issue that money through the agency of their state issue that money to themselves debt-free. That is exactly what is proposed in Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith in 1776. Money represents a receipt for goods and services, the something produced by the state's people, the someone who through the agency of their state issue that money to themselves debt-free. It has to be connected to that. When you start to see that and start to understand that it is your labor, that it is you as a person, the value that you create inherently one, by being alive, and two, by doing any labor that is thoughtful, that is useful, that is needed and wanted by other people, that you can barter as such your time, which is essentially your life, that is what money is supposed to be connected to. Not this fake shit. This closed system, control fucking system. Continuing. The problem of money is thus not even the what, nor the how much, but the who, i.e. the who behind its issuance. The first model is a kind of false alchemy, or a technology of black magic, for it is ultimately a technology to gain the mastery over the will, genius, and productive activity of a people, and ultimately over the physical medium itself. Once again, the problem of money is thus not even the what nor the how much, but the who, i.e. the who behind its issuance, the Federal Reserve Bank. The first model is a kind of false alchemy, or a technology of black magic, for it is ultimately a technology to gain the mastery over the will, genius, and productive activity of a people, and ultimately over the physical medium itself. Holy shit. This is exactly what is talked about in Wealth of Nations, and diluted and distorted in other books. And it is all based, as we shall now see, on a breathtaking series of historical, conceptual, and physical deceptions, and these can only exist so long as there are those unwilling to unmask the deception, or so long as there are those who acquiesce to that system and are unwilling to free themselves from its chains. You've been listening to Babylon's Banksters, China's Money, presented by Hakeem Ali Bokus Alexander on Spreaker, Social Podcasting, and Wisdom, Social Audio Inc., presented for World Reading Club in association with exercisingyourmind.com and UniquilibriuM. I'll be back very soon with the first part, chapter 1, it looks like, historical and conceptual background. It opens with a quote that says, "We shall have world government whether or not you like it, by conquest or consent." James Warburg, son of Paul Warburg, February 17th, 1950, in testimony to the United States Senate Foreign Relations Committee.